as a tree care provider, we are stewards of the urban environment, and we don't look at just the trees as something to either prune or remove. We look at it as a whole system, and I think it's important that people working in this environment respect the habitat and the nature and the animals that are in that habitat, because we are coming into their environment and creating an impact on their environment just by the urbanization that's taking place. So if there's something that we can do to minimize that impact or eliminate that impact, I think we need to find as many options that we can do to help in that way. Well, we're a residential, commercial, and municipal tree care service provider. We take care of trees from root barrier systems to pruning, transplanting large trees, doing insect and disease diagnosis, as well as cabling and bracing. Any kind of service related to the care of trees. We're not just looking to do removals and pruning only. It's more about the whole process, from planting everything properly onto even milling up wood for live edge tables once the tree needs to be removed at some point. Well, I think that when somebody is approaching trees, it's always very important to do a very detailed inspection of the tree. Safety is always number one. First, you want to look for anything that may be of harm to the tree care provider, such as a bee's nest or maybe a raccoon, something like that. You don't want to find that when you get up in the tree. So detailed inspections are important, and that's a time when we may notice that there's squirrels acting kind of defensive, or if there's a bird activity moving in and out of the tree canopy. That'll alert us to know that there's probably a nest we should be looking for. If there's birds that are acting defensive, they're doing that for a reason. So, you know, maybe it's a nest on one portion of the tree that we'll want to avoid that area, or maybe come back at a later date. Well, the best time of year, it varies from species of trees to the condition, any kind of if there's any insect or disease pressure on the tree, you may want to hold off, because trees will develop certain levels of stress depending on how much pruning is needed. So sometimes you want to wait till the growth of the trees slow down, which is typically in January, February, and March timeframe. There'll be a very brief period of that slowing of the growth. And that's more important on large mature trees, such as these trees that are here today. The younger, more vigorous trees, you can pretty much prune year-round without doing any harm. And again, it's a very fast-growing environment, so it's a difficult balance. Well, that is a concern that we have, and it oftentimes we find that there are some nests in the trees, and primarily it depends on the species of animal that's in the trees as to what we would do. If it's squirrels, they're much more tolerant of getting some work done without disturbing them too much. If it's an issue that a tree has to come out because maybe it's a hazardous tree that squirrels are nesting in, we can relocate that nest. They adapt a lot easier, and oftentimes they have several nests in the area that they can use as another option. If it's a more rare bird, we would actually leave that alone and schedule the removal date if necessary at a different time. So we're looking at things like woodpeckers are typically in dead trees, which typically people want to have removed out of their yard. So if we notice that there are any young birds in there, we'll look for the activity in that tree and come back at a later date after the activity is not present. Yeah, I think that the most important thing first is safety again, because you don't want to get into trimming a tree and find that there's a bee's nest in there, because we do have Africanized bees down here in Southwest Florida. And just the same, if there's some other wildlife, maybe perhaps a raccoon, and I've seen some pretty aggressive mockingbirds as well. So it's important to be aware of the environment that you're in and take your time in approaching a tree and kind of study the area and see if there's anything that could first be a safety concern, and then as well as if there's a nest. So if you just kind of be patient, you'll notice some activity, and if not, then it's everything's good to go. So we find that in more mature trees, we'll typically find more wildlife, because trees aren't considered productive trees until they actually become mature trees. And those are the trees that wildlife typically want to occupy. So whenever we approach large mature trees, we're going to have a greater chance that we're going to find wildlife, so we'll do a greater detailed inspection on that. As well as trees that haven't been pruned in a long time that are very dense. Those are the types of trees that you want to take the extra time and pay attention to what type of wildlife might be present. Also, again, if you see a cavity in a tree, those are oftentimes occupied by owls or raccoons, what have you, or woodpeckers. So you want to make sure that if you see a cavity in a tree, and that's typically the ones that people want to remove, that you kind of take some extra time to see if there's anything in there. And if you do find anything that's on the ground, it's always the first thing would be to call the Conservancy and ask for their expertise. So with dead trees, they're finding more and more with research that dead trees are so important to the environment, and we find that more in the forest type of environment. However, this is the urban forest environment that we're working in, and many times people want to remove the trees, which is taking out a chunk of the biodiversity that inhabits those dead trees. So if a tree is not in a hazardous situation that could fall on a house or somebody, and you have the ability to leave the dead tree, that is a very important resource for wildlife. They're finding that there's several types of fungi and the different insects that are beneficial, and it's a kind of a micro ecosystem, if you will. And in the urban environment, there's very few dead trees, and so there is a large portion of that biodiversity that's missing.